Okay. Why is it just my face? Oh, I suppose it gets smaller when you, okay, where is, I don't see. Okay. Oh, crap. What happened? Hi, Karen. Hi, Karen. Can you hear me? Okay. I can't, I think you're muted. You're muted, so I can't hear you.
Okay.
There.
I wondered if I had to get another email, but I used last week's and it worked.
Okay. She sent it out in the e-blast, but I'm glad this one worked. I think it might be the same number
Yes.
every time, so that's good. Yeah.
Oof.
So how are you liking the heat?
Well, we were in the pool.
Oh, that's good.
We have one of those above ground Intex pools.
Oh, wow.
And
Nice.
we just circle around and around and around.
Well, that's nice.
So we were in there for an hour.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm.
So often the grandkids come.
Okay. Yeah, I bet that's nice for them.
Yeah.
Because the pools aren't open, are they? There's not very many pools open.
Nope. Nope. And the ones that are only open for their residents. So Appleton is out of luck.
Oh, okay. Mm, yeah.
So that's why we knew we had to put up our pool this year.
Yeah.
For the grandkids.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we bought it.
Yeah.
We use
Tell
it more.
yourself that. Yeah.
I'm just peeking in to say hi. I'm so excited you're on.
Yes, I made it.
You're recording and everything. I'm so proud of you.
Yeah.
Yay. That's
Well,
all
I
I
think
wanted to say.
I think you set it up so I just could start it. So yeah,
Yeah.
it was easy that way.
Do you see the button along the bottom for a breakout room?
Yes, I did see that. Mm-hmm.
Then you're all set.
So yeah, so I think we'll be able to do. Hopefully, I just press breakout rooms, right, and it'll divide them up and everything.
Yeah, it'll come up, there'll be a pop-up and it'll say how many people are in the meeting right now and how many per room you want, how many rooms you want to make.
Okay.
So I'm guessing maybe you'll make 3 or 4.
Okay.
And then the second screen will ask like a couple questions, which I think I have set up to just automatic. People can come back automatically whenever they're ready, but you can put in there like 5 minutes or 3 minutes worth of discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And it'll give you a countdown in the room when that 3
wait,
minutes is up and people know to come back to the main page.
Okay.
All right. And if you want to, I don't know if you want this fed to live to YouTube when the meeting starts.
How would that work with breakout rooms? I don't know.
It just gets recorded, I think, as blank time. The breakout rooms would not be recorded. It would just be a blank in the video. But yeah, that would be kind of weird. I don't know.
Yeah, well, I'll see who shows up and if we want to do breakout rooms, and then
Okay.
if they do, we'll do that. So.
And you, as the administrator, aren't assigned to a room, but you can click on any room and go to it.
Okay.
And sit in on any room you would like.
Okay. All right.
All right. Enjoy.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm bummed I'm missing it, but I'll watch the video later.
Happy anniversary.
Oh.
Oh, I can't. You're muted.
I'm sorry. I muted myself. Ron grilled out bacon wrapped fillets and twice baked potatoes. It was so good. Family game time.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, her and her husband celebrated 25 years of their wedding anniversary today. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So, she could be excused.
Yes. I think that's a good excuse.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we'll see. It's a holiday week, so I don't know if people are going away, for a long weekend or what.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and whether they're celebrating the week before or after, or I guess most of them it's the week before.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So did you have a book?
Yeah.
Okay. And where did you get yours from?
I got mine on Amazon pretty much after everyone had said they weren't available.
You're kidding. So I went on Barnes & Noble and ordered, and they said they were available, and I still haven't gotten it. It's been 3 weeks now.
Oh.
Yeah. So I'm borrowing somebody's book, but it's just I'm very upset with them. To advertise you have the book, and then you don't have it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I think mine I think took a week, but that was it.
Okay.
So, and Angie ordered it for me.
Okay.
She has Prime.
Yeah. Okay. So that makes you get it a little bit quicker. Yeah. Well, good. I'm like, because I don't have Prime, but on their regular site, it said it was out. So I don't know for Amazon. So I don't. Yeah.
Oh.
So. So now I have to track this book down. They give you a shipping thing. So I got to go back now and track it and figure out where it is and what they did with it and call them up and, all those things that.
We ordered some masks, and those took 2 or 3 weeks, I think.
Really? Where'd you order them from?
That was Amazon also.
Was it? Okay.
Yeah, and it wasn't, I think all of them were Amazon products, not someone else through Amazon.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm sure that's in high demand. So yeah.
Yes.
It was interesting. I was looking at Alme and they make clergy things, and now they have, you can buy masks in liturgical colors. Just thinking about it. I haven't done it yet, but that was great. Oh. Yeah, interesting. Oh, here comes Nancy. I don't know which Nancy this is. Oh, Nancy Nagan. Hi, Nancy. You're muted, so you'll have to unmute yourself. How are you?
Good, good. I just love this book.
Oh, good. Good.
Wow. Yeah.
I think that's a picture of Pat.
Mhm.
Yeah, there's the real Pat. Oh,
Oh, and there's Ron.
here's Ron. Hello.
Okay.
Pat, are you going to the lake?
I'm gonna go daily. So,
Okay.
you know, I might spend a couple of nights there, but Keith, I was gonna stay with Keith and Mary, and they decided they're not going because of Keith. My brother found out he had some prostate cancer, so
Oh, sorry.
I'll send a request in for some prayer on that, but he's doing okay. So anyway, that kind of changed my plans a little bit. And as you know, Mary Beth, my sister, is also not coming up from Florida since they have to quarantine 14 days if they do come. So
Oh, right.
it's just a very interesting year all around when it comes to stuff like that. So yeah. So
Yeah, when I saw Mary Beth's post, I didn't know how to interpret that, and I thought maybe it was all off. But it's not.
Paul and Pauline, and I'm really glad they're all gonna be
Okay.
together. My brother-in-law, who's got cancer right now, not in great shape. So I'm glad they'll all be together and stuff. So yeah, I won't say any more since I think we're recording this. So
Yeah,
Probably not
she'll
a good
maybe
thing
cut
to
that
say
out.
too much
Yeah. So Ron, do you have a book, or did you?
I just got the book out of the library today.
Okay.
And so I have not done any of the reading, but I just
Okay.
thought I would kind of listen in today.
Okay.
And so I can catch up and I'll get the reading done by next week.
Okay.
some
I'll drop
issues here.
the book off for Nancy sometime this
Okay.
weekend. So I'll give her a call and let her know. So okay.
All right.
Thanks.
She's in the kitchen here too, so
Oh.
she can hear you.
Oh yeah. Okay.
I'm curious to listen to the discussion, but I've been in two groups with this book, so
Okay.
I'm just curious to hear others' reactions. So did it with the Synod and then with the Esther board. So
Mhm.
hope you're enjoying it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Very good. Yeah. We can't hear you.
Thank you.
You don't have a book. Oh, okay. Did you order a hard copy or a?
One's coming at Barnes and Noble, and one's supposed to come from the library, but we don't know when.
Oh. Well, I can tell you I ordered one from Barnes and Noble too, and it hasn't come. So I'm very disappointed with them.
Well, I lucked out there was one at the library, so I just ordered it and did the curbside pickup.
Okay,
in Appleton.
okay. Well, I know, I mean, if you have Kindle or those audiobooks, I know you can get it right away, but you know, if it's, so.
Pat, is that something we could get on Hoopla? Do you know?
Pat, she asked you.
Sorry, I'm getting kind of cutting in and out. I think I'm gonna go off and come back on again. Is anybody else having any issues with cutting in and cutting out, or are you all good? Is it just me?
Yep, just you.
All right, let me go leave and come back again and see if that works, okay?
We'll put ours on mute and see if that helps.
Well, let her try this first. You want to put that up and then we'll have a little more light on it.
So do you have that Hoopla? Is that what you were talking about?
We've never tried it, but we can't, couldn't.
You could do it that way.
I think so.
Yeah. Okay.
It's kind of nice to have someone to read it to us.
Oh,
Really?
Yeah. I thought so. I don't know. Hey, Michelle.
Hello, Michelle.
All right,
Okay, Pat.
I'm back again, so we'll see if this is any better, but I was cutting out on everybody, so everybody was cutting out on mine.
So can you hear us now, Pat? How is that sounding?
And I am still getting cut out here.
Well, maybe some of us should go on mute so that, and try that.
I think it has more to do with connection than it does with that. So, but you could try it and stuff.
Well, it is 7:05, so I think we'll start. Before I want to say a few things, but before, do you want to go into breakout rooms and talk? Or is this, no, this isn't as big as it was last week. So do you think it'll be okay with this size group? Or we could divide in two and go into breakout rooms? What do you? This is
good.
This is fine?
yeah.
Okay.
This is good.
This is good. Okay. Because last week was pretty big, but this seems like it might be manageable. So I just want to talk a little bit about the book. Just a reminder that it's if you read the intro, don't skip it because it's really good. She talks about, I just wanted to read a couple excerpts here about, so I'm going to read a few excerpts and I want to comment on them. Americans live within the context of one dominant culture, the one brought to this country by white Anglo settlers. Exploring one's relationship to that culture is where the waking up process begins. Understanding how and why our beliefs developed alongside racial lines holds the promise of healing, liberation, and unleashing of America's vast human potential. I've learned that the way to start to do this is to connect with parts of myself lost in the process of learning to be white. I invite you to use my story to uncover your own, so that you too can discover your power to make the world a more humane place to live, work, and thrive. So for some of us, these things might be very new as we read these chapters in this book, a new discovery. For some of us, it might be review. We're all at different places. And so you'll need to take it at the level where you're at. Some of you will just be reflecting on, oh my goodness, I never knew this before. How is this? And looking at your life. Some of you may think, okay, well, how can I take this then and think about what I'm doing right now and how it's affecting my family, friends, or what can I say and do? So we're all at different places. But hopefully by the end of the book, we'll be able to reflect back and see how this experience has changed us, and then decide how are we going to address racism. She doesn't talk much about action. It's more about reflection. At the last chapter, she does talk about the working on the outside. She says all of this is working on the inside, what we're doing right now. And I think that's important to our work on the outside so that we can do it with integrity. You know, we know about racism, we know the words, what they mean. But then at the end, she talks about then the next step about working outside and what that looks like. So this is sort of the beginner of reflecting on ourselves and racism. Any thoughts about that at all? Otherwise, we're going to start with the first chapter. Okay, so the first chapter, or not the first chapter, the sixth chapter is what we're on right now. And this is Waking Up White, section 2, Midlife Wake Up Calls. So that's chapter 6, and it's called From Confusion to Shock, the course that changed the course of my life. And in this course, she's examining culture and racial identities. And she writes, racism is and always has been the American way, how we have sorted and ranked its people in a bitter, divisive, human robbing system. And then she talks about that. And then the question at the end of that, okay, Pat is cutting out, okay. The question at the end of that, and again, you can comment on the questions, or if there was something in the chapter you really want to speak to, you can do that as well. So the question at the first end of that chapter is, the late historian Ronald Takaki referred to the history taught in American schools as the master narrative, the version of history told by Americans of Anglo descent. Think about what you did not study. Did you learn about Lincoln's view on enslaved Black people, anti-immigration laws of the 19th century, Americans' laws regarding who could and who could not gain citizenship, the Native Americans who once lived on your own town or school land? So as you reflect on your own study of history in school, what did you or did you not learn?
Well, I've learned between this book and some other things that are all being brought up now, because I saw the 60 Minutes special on, was it the Greenwood community that was burned to the ground? It was rich Black people in Tulsa, outside of Tulsa, and they burned the whole place down. And now that, obviously the master narrative left that out of teaching us. Al was a history teacher, and he said he had never heard of it. So we watched that. It was on, it's on demand right now.
Okay.
Karen, how long ago was that?
The 60 Minutes special?
No, the burning
The-
down.
1921. Yeah, it was about the same time as the Spanish flu, and so now they're
Same time as the Great
to-
Depression, right, Karen?
What's that?
Wasn't that the Great Depression too?
Was that the beginning of the Great Depression?
No.
Yeah,
Before?
Great Depression started in 1929 with the stock crash.
Okay.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was before that. And so, but what they know there are mass graves in this area because, I mean, the whole town, they had planes dropping gasoline things down on the roofs of the homes, businesses. And so they're going to dig up these mass graves now, but they're not sure. They have to make sure they can identify whether it was from the fire or the Spanish flu.
Oh, gee.
They'll have to see if, they'll see if they can find anything out.
And who
Oh
was,
yeah.
who was they?
Whites. I don't believe it's specifically said what they were. There was someone that the whites wanted to lynch a Black man, and so they took him back to Greenwood, and then all this fighting began. So it must have been, if they had planes involved, it had to have been prearranged. But now I got off the topic. But I mean, that shows how it's selective.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point, Karen. I think I would agree with that thinking back on the history that I learned, especially U.S. history, that certainly learned about, the pre-Civil War and the slave, but not all the discrimination that happened since then was not
No.
taught in our classes in history. Yeah, we had to dig to find that.
Jim Crows.
And the problem with being able, for the blacks were allowed to vote, but they couldn't get to vote because it was whites controlling the polling places. So that I learned because I watched the movie Selma, which was on, I think that might have been on demand, or it was on Netflix. It was on something recently.
I was listening to Stacey Abrams talk through, there was a Washington Post thing on Monday, and she was talking about, and the reason it struck me was she was talking about a woman who had been in her state who had moved to Wisconsin, an African-American woman, but she couldn't vote because Wisconsin, I couldn't remember this, Wisconsin requires a birth certificate in order to get, in order to vote. And so she was not allowed to vote because when she was born, there was no, she couldn't be born in the hospital because she was African American. And so they never were able to get a birth certificate and that. So now she's in Wisconsin. And I never even thought about something so simple as, even getting a birth certificate. So, simple as that. I was just amazed when she was talking the story about coming to Wisconsin, and now I see that there was another court ruling, and I'm sorry, I got on a different internet setting here, which seems to help. There was just another court thing happened now the last couple of days. Some of you probably know better than I do. It's been in the courts for like 3 years or something about absentee voting or I don't know. It's another one of those things that will definitely be oppressive probably to the wrong folks.
I guess I have two comments. One, as far as Native Americans, the most I learned about how brutal we were was actually the James A. Michener novel Centennial.
Oh,
Although
yeah.
I didn't learn that stuff in school.
Right.
And then number two, when you talk about voting, whether or not Black people could vote, the only thing I remember learning in school was they were 3/5 a person or whatever. That started the whole thing. And now with what, like 9 states still won't allow somebody with a felony conviction to vote. And what's the disproportionate number of felons? What's the racial makeup of that in this country?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Black. So, I mean, there's some pretty sneaky racism on the books. It's just deplorable.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't learn anything in school either, but continue to educate myself. And I find PBS to be great. They always have things to help you learn about racism and all kinds of things that are going on. And about the vote, I mean, it's like it's reoccurring, that issue doesn't ever seems to stop with, again, we've seen in some of these states and, not letting in the mostly Black districts, only having 1 polling place, when they had 5 or 10 or whatever. I mean, yeah. So continues. I'm glad we have internet and TV and all this to educate us,
Yes.
so we know what's going on at least. We can
I'm
know.
probably, oh, sorry, I'm
Go ahead.
probably getting ahead, but the thing that struck me most this week in the reading that I really didn't know anything, and I wonder if Al, as a history teacher, even realized that whole thing, was that whole GI Bill thing. How she deconstructed that. I was just amazed. I never realized how incredibly racist that whole thing was. And I'm sure my dad probably got, when he came home, got a GI Bill. Probably most of us have somebody in our family that benefited from the GI Bill. So that just blew me away. I just never even thought about that or realized that.
Yeah, we can move on to that because that's the next chapter. And so she talks about that GI Bill, and at the end of that chapter, she said, have you ever uncovered a family secret or a piece of information about a person or place that countered your previous perceptions? Once you learned the new information, were you able to look back and see clues that had been there all along, but that you didn't recognize as evidence of a narrative you didn't yet know about? Kind of a hard question.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't have anything in my family, but I did have a stark realization through my work and thinking that my opinion mattered and what was right mattered. And then I was privy to some like big numbers stuff and how the machine can just make a decision and it has what you think or what you feel is right has no relevance whatsoever. And this book, you know, while not healthcare, racism seems to be alluding to that to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I never understood the whole thing about redlining and that till I read this. And then the thing about the blue lining. There was a red line and a blue line. And has anybody ever seen, like in Chicago, Karen? Do you remember any of that down there or anything? When
The
you
only
were
thing
growing up?
I was aware of was I knew, like, and we learned this on All in the Family, right? That was the one where the black moved into the neighborhood and he said, oh, the property value is going to go down.
That's
I mean,
right.
oh, Archie Bunker, is that the one?
what was that?
Is that Archie Bunker?
Yes.
Oh, oh yeah.
Yeah. So, and how they, I mean, that was, I mean, when that show came on, I mean, the first time we saw it, we saw someone was home across the street and called them and said, you have to watch this. But we're watching this. Oh, called after and he says, you're right. You know, I mean, it was making fun of it. But you know, on the other hand, I mean, you look at the blacks and think that's what they were dealing with all the time. But the part, so as far as the redlining, I mean, I've heard the term redlining, but I didn't know anything about blue or anything. But, you know, to see how the realtors could work it to their advantage. You know, they could get the houses sold for little and then hike the prices way up. So. And then when they charged, because the black ones were more of a liability for a loan, they raised their rates. You know, it's
Yeah. When I first moved to Chicago, I remember I lived in Oak Park, which is kind of right in the middle, but it's one of the more diverse suburbs in Chicago, I found out. And I was going to my job at Wrigley Field at the youth house there. And I had no fear. I would take more ignorance probably than fear. I took all these different routes in order to get from Oak Park to up to basically by Wrigley Field, which is, you know, probably only about 10 miles, but took 45 minutes to drive. And I would go through neighborhoods, and I'll never forget, I stopped at a Jewel grocery store one time on the way home. And I walked in and I was the only white person there. And all these folks were looking at me like, she must know she's not in the right place or what, you know, because here I was just picking up milk or something like that. So it was clear that I was just running in and running out. But I thought, oh, maybe this isn't, but it's just that the neighborhoods, then somebody explained to me the next day, they said, oh yeah, that street is all African-American and that street is all Hispanic and that street is white. I mean, they were talking about this, you know, in terms of the areas were just so divided into your areas. Like even today, the south side of Chicago is known as where a lot of the blacks from the south came to settle and that. So I had a great education, I can tell you that. So
And you're here to tell it.
and I did tell it, yes. I think they took pity on me and said, "Oh, she just doesn't know where she's at." So anyway,
Is this the same chapter that they talk about the marginalized whites, or is that a different chapter? The Italian Americans, Polish Americans,
A different one.
different
I
chapter?
think that's
Okay,
different. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, I didn't have a comment on the questions, but I just, as I went, I thought this was the best chapter. I really did, of the ones we just read. It just brought out all of those things, you know, and then from what you were talking about with the GI Bill and the redlining, and then it went on with the urban renewal program. Again, I remember hearing that, but I really didn't know what that was all about. So that was kind of a twist on, you know, what she was saying. You know, I'm thinking urban renewal, they're going to, you know, build it up for the black people, you know. Well, that wasn't the case at all. And then the 1934 and the 1962 federal government, where they underwrote 120 billion in new housing at that time. And I just think all of these things were none of the things we learned about. None of the things we learned about. And as I looked at all these programs coming up, you know, I think it was after our last talk, I sat down.
No.
Our last meeting, yeah, last week. I sat down and I was thinking about, you know, segregations of schools, and just thinking about all these programs that they put into effect to change things, you know, and which did not benefit the black people at all. And I thought about the school systems, because I really think that's the only one of the major ways of making some kind of change. And I thought, okay, so they tried the segregation, taking and separating the two. Okay, well then that didn't go. And so I just sat here, and the thought just came into my head, and I just thought, you know what? They're still doing it today. Pro-choice, this is my statement, pro-choice is just another name for segregation of schools today. Really is. So if you can't take and separate them and take the blacks out and put them over here, then let's just do pro-choice, where now the whites have a choice and they can all remove themselves.
Yeah.
Do you see where I'm coming from? I'm looking at it just the opposite. If you can't take the blacks out, then let's get the whites out so they can have their own school. That's all fine and dandy. Rather than solving the problem in the first place, pro-choice is just another way of segregating, when what we need to be doing is investing in our schools in those areas and building those up. So that just hit me like a ton of bricks. Ton of bricks right there. And that's, you know, and then that brought me back to all these different programs too that we were just reading in here. So that was just the comment I wanted to share with you on that.
Yeah, it's a great way to see that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to do a study and see. I bet you're right on with who's leaving and where they're going, and yeah.
You know, and you don't blame these people, because you want your child to have a good education. But at the same time, I just am thinking that the people in power, again, you know, in the government, making these rules and setting up pro-choice, they're doing the same thing that's been going on forever and ever. Rather than making the decision to get that money into that area and build a whole new school there, just imagine what that would do in that area, you know, with black students and white students. And then we would be teaching our kids how to live together and how to work together in a better community. But you got to have a better place to do it in than what exists out there. So, yeah, okay, I'm done.
Okay, we're going to move on to the next chapter. This was chapter 8, racial categories. Racial is more of a social construct than a biological certainty. She talks about humans have the least intra-species genetic variation and the greatest variation occurring within ethnic groups. And then she talked about hair color and sort of gave that as an example to look at and how to see how race works in America. So her question is, how have you understood racial differences in terms of biology, culture? Have you given it much thought? Why or why not? Or if there's anything else you want to comment on that chapter.
Is this where we get all the dumb blonde jokes
Yeah.
and Polish
Yes,
jokes?
baby,
and
yeah.
Michelle, I think this is your this is the one where you were thinking about the different groups and stuff like that. So I think that's one of the reasons why, you know, because we haven't seen that diversity in terms of us as white, because we think that, yes, we've been oppressed because somebody might take a knock at our culture or something like that. We really don't understand why, you know, somebody who's got a different skin color could feel so, you know, put out by what's happening in the world, because, you know, haven't we all had some kind of a joke made about our heritage or culture or you know, something to that effect? So that was kind of what I was thinking of growing up. You know, we didn't have any African Americans, or even in my neighborhood in Denmark that I know of, Native Americans, and that it was pretty white and that. So I think I just never had an opportunity to even think about what this all means until I quote went to school in Milwaukee and then went to LA and was in Chicago and all those areas.
Do you guys all remember Jimmy the Greek?
Yes.
Do you know why he got fired? Do you remember what he said?
Yeah, it was something about black people, and what was it about their legs, their runners or something?
Yeah, they're better athletes. They're faster runners and they can jump higher.
Yeah.
Right.
Who didn't believe that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah. I to my core believed that. You know,
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, right. I'm like, well, isn't that true? Why do you get fired for that? I don't get it.
Yeah.
You know. So that was my my first comment. My second comment about the chapter was, for European immigrants who, like, for my family in particular, they literally went from Belgium to Wisconsin about 150 years ago. And so that's a group that probably had nothing to do with civil rights and removed themselves. And I remember, like, my parents or my, you know, uncles sitting around telling jokes about dumb Polacks. And it was like, okay, how can I make my group just a little bit more superior to this other group? And, you know, I don't think people, you know, Black Americans, people of color were even part of the conversation. Like, I don't think they even considered it or thought about it. And so when I grew up and people started talking about racism, I was like, well, that's not a conversation I need to be a part of. I'm not racist. And you just look at things in your culture, like listening to Jimmy the Greek and thinking that was true. And it's just ingrained in you, no matter where you grew up or where your parents came from, you know?
Yeah.
So.
Michelle, you asked who didn't believe that the blacks were natural but wasn't it Hitler?
I don't know.
Yeah, because when the black beat out, because the Germans were going to be the superior race in, you know, all things at the Olympics. And then I think he was from the US, the black runner, I don't know what he was, you know, won the Olympics, the gold.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I think about the scientific community in the first part of the last century supported the idea that whites were superior. And, fortunately, we've learned enough about genetics, and what we've learned about genetics is that, yeah, skin color is no difference than difference in color of hair. And that there really is no race, is just a man, that we've constructed something about it, but it's not really real. So, but I think that what they instill is perpetuated and still carries on, like what you were talking about, Michelle.
And I got a question for you, Pastor Jennifer. Wasn't there something with I remember the whole Tower of Babel and Cain and Abel in terms of curse and weren't there some churches that thought that there was a separation of the races as a result of going way back in the Old Testament? Or is that just a dream I had once or whatever?
There probably is. I don't know it. I know the Tower of Babel was, it says, they're trying to build one tower to God and be like God or reach God. And so God makes them all the languages. That was their story of how he got languages and people separated them all. But I'm sure there's something that somebody could construct to say, that the races are to be separate, but I don't know what it is. So, yeah. I thought, all of these beliefs I had, because they were just unexamined. I never examined them before to look and see that, that they're very hurtful beliefs. I just assumed them. And I would have said not in a bad way. But when you think about it, if Black people are athletes and musicians, that's where they're allowed to excel. If you're allowed to excel somewhere. But think about all the people who aren't good at, being an athlete or in entertainment, and what happens to their gifts and talents, if you're not allowed to excel, and how crushing that is for a lot of, Black people.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we built up this assumption that that's just what they're good at, when that's probably the only places they could get, some of them could get in, and not even all of them. Yeah.
And it's still that way. So many of the Blacks are really struggling to get that basketball or, whatever scholarship to get into college.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to really work on that part.
And I think some of that goes back to Blacks, when they were freed as slaves, were so suppressed with Jim Crow laws and whatnot that there's been no accumulation in wealth in families like whites have been able to have, that can afford to send their kids to college. And so if their families don't have the wealth that has been able to accumulate through generations, that, like you say, Karen, they have to maybe depend on that athletic scholarship to get in. So.
And so that's why their athletic skills are probably so much greater, because of the culture, that situation. So they strive harder to be good at that, because they know that might be their way out, or their way to move on. Same thing probably with, musicians and things like that. I just wanted to share with you, as I was reading through this chapter, I remembered, again, on TV with everything that's been coming on, Karen, one of the male Black people that was on, I don't know if it was a talk show of some kind. And he said, how many of you know Jane Elliott? Okay, so I thought, okay, yes, and she was the third grade school teacher who did the brown-eyed exercise with her kids in third grade. So how many of you heard of that one?
I think I did.
Okay, so otherwise I encourage you to just pull up Jane Elliott and you'll have the whole thing there. But I was looking up something on the internet while I was reading this chapter, and it came up that she was giving a talk in 1992 with Oprah Winfrey on her show in 1992. And so what they did was this exercise, they called it. When the people came in, they decided to split the group into blue-eyed and brown-eyed. And then they fed the brown-eyed group donuts and treated them really well. And the blue-eyed group, they were inferior because their eyes let too much light in, too much light in. And the people that worked at her show were just treating them horribly. And it was so interesting. So they get inside the show, and then of course they get pushed to one side and the brown eyes are on the other side. But the blue-eyed people also had to wear this green collar. And so it was just interesting listening to the comments that they were saying. We were really treated bad and all of this. And you could just hear what they were saying. You could just hear a Black person saying that, so, talking in that same way. And that's the racist part. And they were getting so upset within that 1 hour. And the lady up front, which was Jane Elliott, you know, they kind of thought she was really a bad person because she was doing all this to them. And it was just, you know, finally they had to let them know what they were doing at that program, you know. And there was one, this is a good one. There was one man that stood up and he said, God created the races. And Jane Elliott said, God did not create the races. God created the human race. Man created the races. And I thought, oh my gosh, is that so true? And then she went on to explain that as we are all descendants from the Blacks. As the Blacks migrated from around the equator and moved farther north, that affected the melatonin in their skin. And that's why you have a lighter colored person living farther north, farther away. And I thought, oh my gosh, so it's not biology at all. It's not. And I just found that so interesting when she talked about that. And then it showed up in one of the later chapters here. Do you remember that, where she's talking to her daughter, and her daughter said, well, I already knew that, Mom. And I just, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. But that I found to be really interesting, that God created the human race, and man created racism then. So, but look her up. She's very, very interesting things out there.
Thanks. So we'll move on to the next chapter. Chapter 9 is about white superiority. How white people decided white people were the best people of all. And she talks about who made up race and why, about how culture contributes to human variation. And we already talked, genetic variations is mostly within racial groups. She talked about how trying to fix others to make them like herself, and that would help them. And then Caucasian as a human invention. So in this chapter, she asks, prior to reading this chapter, what did you know about the history of naming the races? How do you feel about the term Caucasian?
Where I know it comes from the Caucasus Mountains, when this fella found those beautiful, naked, light-skinned women, as she says. So how do we fit in to the Caucasian?
Because we are all from that area, that what do you say that? The Caucasus Mountains are in that range, and the area was divided into that whole area, which is Europe, is included in there. And
right.
Therefore,
but the Irish,
because she was white and it was in that area, he came up with this name that then they divided scientists divided us into 3 races: the Caucasoid, the Mongoloid, and the Negroid. And then later on, you know, that just progressed. They came up with a lot more races after that. But those were the first three that they came up with. And all the other ones have kind of disappeared except for that Caucasian that still exists today.
So what confuses me though is we're saying Caucasian. Okay, I'm Swedish, but the Irish weren't included. The Italians weren't, the Germans weren't.
What do you mean they weren't included?
They were, she was saying in here that they weren't considered Caucasian. Okay.
But our descendants were all from that area, from that Caucasus mountainous area. That's where Germany was. That's where all of those places were.
Right. So that's what confused me. So, okay.
It was the area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea.
Okay, maybe the Irish thing was in a different chapter because I'm not seeing it in here.
I thought it was just more of a cultural thing, Karen. I don't know that they were saying it was that they were actually from different parts of the world. Because they don't have the typical Anglo-Saxon culture that's being taught in schools and that has been adopted as American. And correct me if I'm wrong. That's what I took out of it though.
Okay.
So what are we going to put when they ask you to check the box and it has Caucasian? What should we put instead? That's what I'd like to know. European American or no, just American?
Just gonna look for the asterisks to see if it's required.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you could refuse to answer it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're the human race.
Yeah, human race.
That was one question on the census that we had to do, that you had to check what you were. And then it also asked something about like nationality. And I even called on that because I thought, what do they need to know that for? You know, and again, so that, yeah, that kind of disturbed me with that, the Caucasian, you know, now knowing where that's coming from. And before reading this chapter, you know, it says, what did you know about the history of naming the races? And the only thing that I really thought is basically kind of named from the area it came from, you know. But yeah, so that was upsetting on the census even that we had to fill out, because that was one of the questions, and then there was the other one following it about some kind of nationality.
What was Nancy, what was the answer? What did they want for nationality?
Like where your ancestors came from.
Really?
Yeah.
It wasn't just American? Were you,
no, I don't think so. I don't remember if American was one choice there.
wow.
Yeah. But she said they kind of wanted to know probably your line. I don't know. It was just strange. That question was even on there.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But wouldn't it help to understand where certain people are living? Like the African Americans or where the Native Americans are living now?
Yeah, except now when you say that, it's almost like the GI Bill, because I keep hearing with the census how important it is to know that stuff because of the certain entitlements that you know, go to certain folks and stuff, which means we're still doing all this garbage around, you know, giving money, you know, like somehow we're being really nice as white people sometime and giving money to groups that are less fortunate than we are, kind of like when we used to give to the missionaries and and that in other countries, and that was part of privilege also. So, you know, now when I think about it, it's sort of like, yeah, why do they need to know that? We're just all part of the human race, except that we're in a society now where they want to divide us into even smaller groups. They want to know exactly, you know, are you from Mexico? Are you Iranian? Are you, you know, gonna be a terrorist? Or, you know, because we attribute, there's so many people that attribute certain things to certain ethnic groups and cultures.
Okay, we'll move on to chapter 10, the melting pot. And that was about who could and who could not melt into the pot.
Yeah.
She talks about the melting pot according to Anglo-Saxon standards, where the Anglo culture was superior, and it spread far and wide. She talked all about that. The manifest destiny, spreading American democracy, capitalism, Christianity westward and imposing our culture on others. She talks about Indian schools. We talked about that. Citizenship, how that was related to skin tone, that was a qualifier. And white men decided who was white and who was not. I like her analogy about the U.S., the dominant culture. Like she kind of thought of as making people think the way you think, and she compared that to her marriage, instead of building around the differences that you have, trying to make someone think like you do. And talked about that, how she didn't make the connection between her comfort and how that was built on the back of enslaved Africans, allowing people to work to make America grow, but that not considering them full Americans. So the question she has there, think about your heritage. If you are white and know little about it, why do you think that is? Do some ethnicities in your mix get played up and some down? What family stories have held fast through the generations? How have they shaped your understanding of America as a meritocracy, a society in which everyone succeeds or fails on their own merits? You can comment on that or anything else you want to in the chapter.
This is actually where it wasn't the Caucasian thing, it was the Anglo-Saxon. And it was the white ethnics, refers to light-skinned people immigrating to America from non-Anglo countries like Ireland, Italy, Russia, and Germany. That was the part that had confused me, that, you know, they seemed to be surrounding Central Europe. So it just, how were they not part of us? What is Anglo-Saxon? Oh, that's part of that WASP thing too. I didn't realize I was a WASP. I think I attributed that, I thought it was Jewish or something.
But isn't WASP white Anglo-Saxon Protestant? Right? Is that?
Okay, is that what the P is? Okay, I think so.
Well, Anglo-Saxon is just relating to or demoting the Germanic inhabitants of England from their arrival in the 5th century up to the Norman conquest. That's what it says. Anglo-Saxon were a cultural group who inhabited England from the 5th century. They comprised people from Germanic tribes who migrated to islands from the continental Europe. Their descendants and indigenous British groups who adopted many aspects of Anglo-Saxon culture and language.
Germanic, does that, I mean, because it says Germany isn't part of the Anglo-Saxon. So is Germanic something different than Germany?
Yeah, and I don't know, the maps were different back then. So
That's true.
I'd have to look it up because I don't know, because the maps weren't Germany, France, you know, they're all very different back then. So yeah.
I always thought, now I'm kind of ashamed of it, but, I thought they always used to talk about what a privilege it was for a Native American kid to come into, you talk back to that pro-choice thing, now the reverse, that a Native American could go to school. And then when I was reading this about how it just decimates the character of the kid, it made me really ashamed to think that we did that to somebody just because we could, and sad that happened.
Pat, I had that same emotion because I mentioned that last time when I was in Phoenix. We had gone to the Heard Museum, and they have one display, and it's on the Indian schools. And I said I never heard about that. I don't remember ever hearing anything about that. And as I went through there and was reading everything from room to room to room, and just the number of schools that were there, and the pictures that you'd see, and how they cut their hair off, and change the clothes. I mean, we saw all those pictures. And I mean, if you ever go to Phoenix, you have to go to the Heard Museum, and you have to see that. I think that's probably one of the reasons we were probably going to have our women's trial and convention there, because that whole thing, and they had a tour that was going to be going there. But that just shocked me. It just shocked me. And we even had those schools in Wisconsin. And then you find out that the last one was just ended in what, 1960 something?
Yeah.
It's that.
Wow.
Yeah. And I just,
to me.
when I saw what some of those kids, then what they had to do is they had to work the fields while they were there. They didn't go home in the summer, so they had to work the fields. So it was like slave labor also. It was just, I mean, it just made me feel horrible as an American, knowing what our country had done at that point. Yeah.
Well, another example is the Japanese internment camps.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't hear a whole lot about that in history class.
No. And I just got done reading a book that this Dirk Van Lannen, or whatever his last name was, the Dutchman, and I've got a series, his 3 books that he wrote. And he actually came and spoke to us in Arizona when we were out there, the area we were in, the old people, and they had him come and talk. And when I got done with the first book, I found out he was a little boy in there. He was talking about when he was 4 years old. But it made me think, internment camp, oh my gosh, this sounds so much like a concentration camp. They were doing the same thing. When we go back to this first question here, if you were white, and how little did you know about it, and why do you think that is? And as I was talking to my sister, and she said her mother-in-law, so this would be more like probably my grandmother's age, and at that time period, and how in Oshkosh it was the Russians and the Germans and the Italians, they were all fighting against one another. There wasn't a race with blacks at that point. That was the big thing that was going on. And I didn't see that when I was growing up, because by that time it was done. So my parents, they spoke English, but my grandparents spoke German. And so the Germans, when they came, they had their German church, because then they could communicate with each other. Well, when we talk about this melting pot, and all these people that needed to get together, well, I can see now why, because the Germans were afraid too that they were going to get nabbed and pulled out and probably put in an internment camp. And so they needed to learn how to speak English so they would melt in, so they wouldn't stand out. And this is all making a lot more sense to me now, as I start putting these little pieces together. And it's just like, yeah, we are waking up white, but it's sure took us a long time to do this, didn't it? Yeah. And so that's why probably I didn't learn a lot of German, because that was like between my great aunts, when I'd see them, they would speak German to one another, so you'd pick up on a few words. Well, my parents knew a few words too, but as time went on, that that went away. So we don't know, you know, a lot. Like the Indians, they would speak that language, you know, and then they were taken to these schools and they were stripped from that, and it's hard for them to go back. The other thing that I thought of was the dreamers. So what happened to these Indians? The same thing is really could possibly end up happening to our dreamers, because they came here as a young child, you know, speaking their own language. Well, the parents spoke their language, but now they've been raised their whole life in the US. All they know is the US. And now if we take and send them back to a country they know absolutely nothing about, how can they even survive there? They don't fit either place. It's the same thing.
And they could have been born
They just
here.
said here about the Indians, you know. Is it ever going to stop? I don't know.
Oh,
But it's got to stop. It's got to. This has got to be the end here now.
We've got our cages down at the Mexican border now. We've got kids living in basically we got internment camps going on with all the Hispanics that are sitting at the border that can't move or go anywhere. Can't go back home, can't stay here.
Yeah, and they're all catching COVID-19 right now too.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
disgusting.
Not good.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I thought too about, I think it was, now it's been maybe many years ago, when they talked about the Anglo-Saxon culture, you know, being more English. And wasn't there a time, it was somebody from this state who wanted to make a law that we could only speak English, you know, that would
It
be
is a law
primary.
now. Isn't
Is
it a
it?
law?
Is it?
Because she refers to that someplace here.
Because, well, and I don't live there, but when I visited my niece when she lived in Florida, I mean, all the signs were bilingual. And I remember she had to get a job and she had to speak Spanish, you know, because she had clients who were going to be Spanish. So it's interesting. You know, I don't think they have that law, obviously, because they have a lot of Spanish speaking people and it affects the economy and everything else. But I don't know if that was ever passed as a law. I remember several years ago, it was something here in Wisconsin, one of the legislators wanted to do that, but I didn't think it passed. I don't know. Maybe Ron, you know, I don't
know.
Okay.
I recall it wasn't that long ago either.
Yeah, it wasn't. No.
40 years ago. It seems not that long ago to me these days. So
Yeah, I think I was a
It
kid,
was
so
less than 40.
yeah.
But when did they have that mentioned here? What year did they mention that in? Because I'm thinking that probably came again as part of the melting pot. They wanted to do that because then nobody could speak in their own language against the government.
Well, I'm just saying that was something, it wasn't in her chapter, but it happened. I remember us discussing that in politics.
I read that in here though, something.
Oh, did you? Oh.
It was in here.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I sure hear enough people saying, well, if they can't speak English,
Right.
then they might as well not live here or whatever. They go back to their own country. And I'm like, come on, give me a break, you know?
Well, and that whole thing about, you know, allowing people who, we can't make them American, but we allow them to work here as hard as they want to and make cheap goods or give us cheap food and they don't get paid much so that we can live a more comfortable life. I mean, that just continues on and on, especially now with the Mexicans and people from other countries. Yeah.
And they used to be called the migrant workers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, and I think, again, we learn more about this because of the COVID and because of the meatpacking plants and all of these other things that we realize who's here, what they're doing, and, you know, how they weren't being taken care of. And then it's affecting us. So then we're seeing it, but, you know, again, things we don't hear about. Yeah.
Well, it comments that COVID only, it really is, it's not a white disease. It mostly affects, because you hear about that. I mean, I went to eye doctor the other day and got chatting with the lady because I have this 815 number and she had lived in Rockford. She was originally from the Bronx in New York. And I'm not sure how we got on it, but she's lost 5 family members to COVID in New York. Yeah, 5 of them. And, you know, all I could do was express my sadness to her. But in my world here, I think it's sort of like out of sight, out of mind. You know, it's inconvenient for us, but for most of us, we haven't been really touched that personally by folks that have had COVID. And I mean, I know a couple of people that have gotten sick with it, but nothing like this lady who tells me about her 5 family members that have died of COVID. So it's like two different worlds sometimes you feel like you're living in.
We were, the week, last week, I believe it was, well, like the 14th, Sunday the 14th, our family was going to get together for 4 days to celebrate my mother's 100th birthday, which was in March. But this was when all the great-grandkids and grandkids could get together. So with the COVID, we decided, let's just cancel. It was going to be 26 of us in a house in Kissimmee, Florida. We thought this isn't making sense. So my niece and her husband and 2 kids had scheduled vacation because we said, don't take it off your calendars. So they scheduled vacations. So they went to the beach in Florida. He is now in the hospital with COVID.
Oh,
I'm so sorry.
So, and he thought he was getting better. Friday night, she called the ambulance and he refused to go. Saturday morning, and said he'd divorce her and for calling. So in the morning, he decided the only thing he could do was he had to drive himself to the hospital because you couldn't leave the 2 kids home because he was already quarantined in a room. He was very sick. And so then they told him, well, he might go home Sunday. Well, no, his fever went up again. On Monday, when he was feeling better, the doctor came in and said, no, your pneumonia is worse now. So I haven't heard another report now since.
Sharon, how old is this person?
40.
Wow.
Yeah, because I think, yeah, I think he's 40 now.
We have church services with Prince of Peace on Sundays and with our son's church in Wauwatosa. And already several weeks ago, they were saying, at first it was hitting the Black population here so hard. Now it's the Hispanic population. And I'm not sure what caused that distinct shift, but it was probably things like the meatpacking plants. It was probably working conditions.
Well, and if you're an essential worker or a frontline worker, or, you know, you're just exposed more to that. Yep.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of those essential jobs are low-paying jobs that may not be necessarily skilled, and they have no choice but to go to work because they need to pay a mortgage or buy food or whatever.
And all know things like this, but it was a surprise to me. I asked our sister-in-law, who's a farm girl, why were the meatpacking plants so essential? You know, couldn't people do with less meat? And she said, if they don't butcher the hogs by the time they're so many pounds, 200, they won't get in the equipment anymore.
Right.
They can't be butchered. They can't be raised because they're going to get tough, you know, or whatever. Yeah, there's all these little things that make it so complicated. Can't shut down the meat plants.
Well, I mean, that's one point of view. I mean, the other point of view would be to not butcher them, and it'd be a huge loss of money, and the government would probably have to do programs to spending to bail out the farmers or help out the farmers. But it's just the route that was chosen. So, like, why don't we have a national mandate to where masks when we go out.
Right.
What's so hard about that?
And that'll get into politics, so we better not talk about
Oh,
that.
it's all politics. It's all politics.
Nothing is it, yes.
I would love to say something, but
Well, judging from the reaction here, Leah, you are in good company.
So we'll move on to the last chapter here, headwinds and tailwinds, understanding systemic racism. And systemic racism is racism showing up in systems, institutions, and structures. And on page 54, she talks about systemic racism equals skin color, symbolism, plus favoritism, plus power. And she talks about a quote from a friend, power, this systemic racism is that white people have the power to turn their feelings into policies, law, and practices. That white folks run everything. A system is a way of doing something. A system is structured. The beliefs attached to skin color is the barrier. And the belief in this skin color, what it means, it's hard to pinpoint and change. And then she talked about the young woman, Cindy, and kind of went through all of that and how to see what systemic racism looks like. Her question then at the end of that chapter was, consider each of these tangible and intangible aspects of your life: work, sense of belonging, social connections, choice, education, health, food, legal protection, housing, transportation, medical care. How easy or hard has it been for you to attain each? You can comment on that or anything else you want to in the chapter.
I think a simple answer is easy for all of them, being a privileged white person.
I mean, think about something as simple as a speeding ticket.
Huh.
You know, were we asked to get out of our car? Were we asked to, you know, do anything extraordinary?
Yeah.
You know, did we have a gun pointed at us? Were we shot? Were any of our friends ever stopped and shot?
Yeah, or how many times have, you know, if we've been pulled over, have we just gotten a warning? You know?
Mhm.
And never asked any other strange questions. You know, just accepted things the way they were. You know, so they start asking the blacks additional.
What are you doing in this neighborhood? You can't possibly live in this
Yes.
neighborhood.
Yeah.
What do you mean you're going for a run?
Yeah.
Right,
Running from what?
right.
Yeah,
Precisely. Yeah.
yeah.
And you can, I mean, you can see the fear the blacks would have when we first talked about putting masks on and requiring it.
Yeah, fearful.
Yep.
I didn't realize, you know, you're talking about the GI Bill and stuff like that. Woodrow Wilson, this week, my former boss in Chicago, his name is Dr. Sleet, and we used to have some wonderful political conversations. In fact, he was the first person who told me, he said he believed Trump would win. And that was before Trump had hardly even started. I said, oh, please don't say that. You can't believe it. And he was right on. But he had posted on Facebook about how they had taken the Woodrow Wilson, there was a building named for Woodrow Wilson at Princeton where he went to school and got his BA and doctorate, that had now been taken down or whatever, because I don't recall all the details, but there was something about Woodrow Wilson that was decidedly racist. And he said it was the right thing to do. And then seeing the comments from some other folks, it was just curious to me to see. And I'd wondered what he had thought about that, because I knew he had gone to Princeton, you know, for his doctorate and BA and stuff. So. So what did Woodrow Wilson do? Why was he? Can anybody tell me that part? Do you know?
No, I don't.
Okay.
We had a junior
guess-
high school in Manitowoc named Woodrow Wilson. I had no idea.
I guess I'll have to read more about it to find out why he was considered what he had done that was more racist. It's interesting to see all these this whole conversation about the statues, and listening to Joe Biden talk the other day about, you know, about the difference he thought there was between people that, you know, were trying to promote racism versus, you know, that we you know, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, which I do agree with in that, because I don't think we should just tear down everything. And I will agree, one thing my brother-in-law said, he said, you know, we ought to leave some up for reminders of how not to act, and that, so, you know, but that whole conversation is so incredibly interesting also. Just where is that going to lead? And you know, now at Manitowoc tonight, there was Facebook, the guy on Facebook with the noose or whatever, and now they're protesting there. And I'm so afraid that we're going to lose sight of what the protests are really about, because everything is getting protested right now, and it probably deserves to be, but I'm afraid that it's going to end up backfiring, sadly. So
Right, you put too much in it, you can't sort anything out then.
right.
I think, you know, statues are powerful symbols. You know, my personal opinion is they could go in a museum and we could study them.
Yeah.
But, you know, when I was traveling in Europe, I remember in Italy, all the statues were like men and war. And then I was in Switzerland and the statues were women, women and families. And so it was interesting. And I mean, there's a very different culture between Switzerland and Italy. And maybe those statues and somehow reflect that, reflect those, you know, Italy is very machismo and, you know, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And, so, yeah, I mean, I think it's curiosity, you know, what does it say about us with the statues or the different landmarks we have, and why do we have them? And I do think they say something about a culture and what it, you know, what it stands for, what it values.
Yeah.
And I do think we have to think it through and talk about, so if we take them out, do we want something else? Do we not? You know, what do we want? What do we want to say about who we are? You know, what we value.
So Mississippi, you know, they changed their flag, which was
I did hear that. Mm-hmm.
Was pretty earth-shaking when you think about it, that, you know, they took out the Confederate symbol or whatever, that they actually voted in a southern state like that to do it. I don't know if 10 years ago that would have even been considered. So we are making progress, and that it just feels like we go 2 steps forward and then 3 steps back sometimes.
Pat, I liked your comment about the statues reminding, how did you say that? Reminding us of the past, whether it was good or bad?
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, and I think again of the concentration camps in Germany and Poland, you know, and how Hitler, well, how the government over there doesn't, what did they do? They I don't know, one city, they buried the whole thing because they didn't want the reminders anymore of the war. But the concentration camps, you know, I think we need those over there, because that is a reminder, and it is important. And I you know, now I look at some of those statues, what you're talking about, and maybe we do need those statues as a reminder of what happened, but we need to go beyond that then, you know, in our culture, in our society. But again, that takes a lot of talk to get that thought across to maybe some of these people that are protesting, you know, as to maybe the good in that sculpture being up too.
Well, maybe putting them in a museum is the best thing, though, in that case, and saying, you know, this was part of our history at some point. Let's learn from it. Or, but then again, since a lot of this history I didn't learn the first time around when I was growing up. I guess who knows what history is except whoever constructs it and teaches it to us. So this is kind of like a whole new history lesson I'm getting as I read this particular book, you know, about what she's saying and stuff.
Here's another thing. When I went to Springfield, I went to the Lincoln Museum, and in there you walk in, and there's the family of Lincoln sculpture right in the middle, so you can stand with the family and get your photo taken.
Right.
And then you walk back a little bit farther, and there's the, I don't know if it's I don't know what building it might be, but anyway, Lincoln is out there. And then the person that shot him was there. And that was the first time I went. The next time I went, he wasn't there anymore. They removed, what's his, Booth? Was it Booth?
Yeah.
They removed him. So we were talking to the guy that was kind of, you know, the security guard or whatever. Said, boy, we think that's wrong that they removed him. He's part of history, and that's an important part. You remove him, now you don't have the whole story in front of you. And he said, I truly agree with you. So yeah, maybe destroying all these sculptures isn't really the answer, you know.
Ron, did you want to say something? Okay.
Yeah, it just had to do with the statues. You know, I think we need to look at some of the reasons the statues were put up, especially at the Confederate generals. And at the time they were put up, which was around the turn of the last century, was for expressing white power over people. And those are the ones I think really need to be relegated to museums. So.
And again, I think as a white person, I don't understand their power, you know, to see a statue like that. You know, if I lived there every day in my town and what it was meant to say, you know.
I wonder if it also is a difference, and no disrespect to the men in the group here, but recently I heard an interview with Gloria Steinem where she said racism and sexism are very much intertwined, and they're very much the same, on the same kind of road. And I wonder if for men statues have any different kind of value than even for most women, and that a just curious question.
Yeah, what are the statues of women in our country, and where are they? Liberty, Statue of Liberty, I guess. I'd be interested to know that. I'll look it up. What?
I said that was given to us by the French.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Mary Tyler Moore there's a statue of her in Minneapolis.
Oh, that's right. Okay.
And
They do have the statue of that little girl, I think in like, I don't know if it's in Times Square.
Yes,
the
Wall Street, yeah.
Yeah, with her hands on her hips, and she's got that, you know, big confident look, and that's only been erected within the 5 years? I don't know, something like that.
Well,
but you're right.
A lot of men or a lot of folks were really pissed off by that little girl because, you know, they thought, how could she stand there and judge us, basically, it seemed like. So, you know.
Yeah, what was that? That was right around the time of Hamilton. What's that statue for?
Yeah. And that. Well, they had the little girl was standing up there, you know, they have what is the big bull? Is it because it's the bull market or whatever in front of the stock market? And they had the girl, somebody had put her just right in front of the bull. So they thought it was making a big statement about the stock market or power or whatever there. So they didn't think it was appropriate she should be there. It was right around the time when also they were doing all the women's marches.
Time's Up.
Happening. Yeah.
Yeah, Time's Up, and the income inequality, and probably Harvey Weinstein. Yeah, so it's only a couple years probably.
Yeah.
But yeah. Anyway, you guys asked about Woodrow Wilson.
Yeah.
There was a famous fight that he had with a guy named Trotter, who was a black activist who wanted to travel to Europe to promote black activism in Europe, and Woodrow Wilson told him no. And then when at the start of World War I, Woodrow Wilson had this 14-point speech where he talked about inclusivity and how we all had to come together. And then Trotter pointed out his inefficiencies, and they talked about how Wilsonian has become a shorthand for U.S. foreign policy and the hypocrisy of it. And they talked about him specifically later on, that he was a racist even during his time. He wrote sympathetically about the KKK and described black Southern people as, quote, ignorant and inferior race, close quote, who couldn't be trusted with political power. So apparently it's well documented that he was racist.
Proud of it. Did you? And he was proud of it.
Proud of it, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for checking that out, Michelle. That makes sense now. Now I understand why I think the other thing that I read about Princeton was there was something about it. Maybe it wasn't just Princeton, but most colleges, in terms of how difficult it was for anyone of color to get admitted into the college, that there were, and when did we have all the quotas? Was that back in the 60s, or when I remember hearing about quotas and
Yeah.
that?
With affirmative action, you mean?
It was that, and it was like you had I guess so. It wasn't only for women, but also for hiring different races and such that you had to do. There was a whole quota thing.
That was mentioned in the chapter when they talked about the GI Bill, where there was the quota for the number of blacks that could go get into college. There was a quota there. There were only certain locations. But you're talking about quotas much later than that, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can remember hearing about quotas and that, even as I.
Not
in the
as
60s,
far as
70s.
at employment, at
I
places
think-
of employment, they say for this many whites, you need to at least interview or have, someone of color. So, yeah, that's.
I think the response to that was the whites decided that was discriminating against them.
That's right.
They shut it down because of that, but I think it was an attempt after the civil rights movement to get people more involved, through companies and through education and different things. It kind of backfired.
I think it was kind of a reparation type of thing, that they had been discriminated for so many years that they needed to make some amends. And so let's provide some quotas, and white people took it as a reverse discrimination,
Yes.
not realizing how they've been discriminating for years.
Against the
and
blacks
years.
all the time.
Yeah. So I think it's almost 8:30, so we'll wind up here. We meet next Wednesday, if you can make it, July 8th at 7, and we'll do Why Didn't I Wake Up Sooner? That section, pages 61 through 91 for that time.
Okay.
So any other final comments before we end with a prayer? Thank you, everyone, for coming, and we'll just keep going ahead and keep learning more about ourselves and awakening and hopefully making a difference not only in ourselves, but finally as we affect others as well. So let us pray. Gracious God, we thank you for this time together to reflect on our lives, to reflect on our privilege, to be awakened to what is going on in our lives and around us. Help us to to see how you want us to treat one another, especially people of color, Black people. What is it that we can say and do to support our brothers and sisters as we work to build the reign of God that you want through us? In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
And
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you. See you next week.
Thank you.
bye, everybody.
Thank
Thank you, guys.
Happy 4th
Thank
of
you.
July.
You too.
Stay safe.
You too. Yes. Stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Nancy.